Welcome in, listeners. This is Margin Mavens, a podcast hosted by Steph and Kayla, where we share our thoughts on all things literature. Today, we are joined by author of It Came from the Trees, Allie Russell. It Came from the Trees is a middle grade horror book following Jenna as she ventures into the familiar woods with fellow scouts, only for things to take a turn for the unfamiliar and scary. Now, make sure to grab a snack and a drink, unless you're driving, then remember 10 and 2 and come hang out with us while we dive in. All right, Allie, thank you so much for being here. First and foremost, that's always important. This book was fun. I haven't read a middle grade horror, I think, since I was a middle grade age. And so I really walked into it going like, oh, it'll be fun. I'll enjoy it. But it's not going to really like scare me, right?
No, it scared me.
I've read like adult horror, and so I really walked in overconfident in my ability to walk through it without being afraid, and then was pretty afraid. So we meet Jenna, right? She's this young girl who's very familiar with the woods because of her upbringing, right? So none of this comes from a place of never been here before, had to figure out the woods on top of this mysterious creature that's existing. So it was a really fun novel, and it's very short, but it's impactful. There was never a point where I was like, oh, okay, let me move along,
It was also extremely emotional.
Yeah, there was
For
a lot.
me, anyway.
There was a lot going on, and the fact that throughout the novel, especially at the beginning, right, you get this sense you're navigating the entire thing in the eyes of a child, right? And so you're getting this sense of figuring out like what adults you can trust and what adults you can't trust. And having it be to where, she rightfully believes like, okay, I'm going to trust my mom. I'm going to talk to her about everything. And her mom's not really there for her. And so there was a lot of underlying horror and angst, but from ways that you wouldn't expect to see it. And so I really felt for her when her entire like inner monologue was just like, my mom doesn't believe me. And I'm like, man, we've all been there. Hopefully not about Bigfoot, but if we've been there about Bigfoot, then that makes it, all the more relatable. So one of the first questions is, what was the driving force for creating this book and choosing to do middle grade?
Thank you for the questions. Great question. And I just want to say I'm so glad that this book resonated with you guys, even though you're older readers, because I think there is this misconception that middle grade is only for middle grade readers, and it's not. Anybody can read it. But I guess one of the driving forces behind me writing this book was that I was just out of excuses. I wish I had a more romantic story than that, but I'm a big procrastinator. It's really hard for me to sit at my computer and get started on writing. And when the pandemic happened back in 2020, we weren't going to, some people were not, commuting back and forth to offices and whatnot. I had fewer errands to run. So I was just really out of excuses. So I had to sit and write. So I sat with one of my best friends. We kind of we did our own version of NaNoWriMo where we both just sat and wrote on our own. It was great to have her for accountability purposes. So that was really the only reason. And then middle grade, it's a natural space for me. Some of my best and fondest reading memories come from that age range, from ages 8 to 12. That's when I was really getting into horror. I went from Goosebumps to Fear Street and Christopher Pike, and then to to Stephen King, because there wasn't a ton of children's horror at that time. So every very, very good and cozy memory I have of reading comes from that age range. So I just naturally wanted to help younger readers create their own memories. So middle grade's a good tool to do that.
The imagery of jumping from R.L. Stine's, the one that I remember most fondly is the peanut butter one. There's a peanut butter and jelly one that I think is a choose your own adventure. Going from that to Stephen King is really funny in my brain because Stephen King doesn't hold his punches. He is objectively a little weirdo.
I will say there was some Fear Street and some Christopher Pike in the middle, so at least there was that. It wasn't just plunging into like a cold lake of fear with King.
Yeah, I think my first book I ever read from King was The Thin. It's a short
Oh,
one.
Thinner?
Yeah, and that one threw me for a loop. And I think I immediately was like, I see what he's got going on. I don't know if I want to read another one of his. But alas. So obviously with this one, it centers around this idea of cryptids, right? There's a lot of kind of like Appalachian vibes to it, right? Where they all have these ideas of what's going on. Don't know if anyone else had seen on like social media and stuff, but it got very popular this past year of people living in Appalachia and talking about like superstitions that they have or things that they do to prevent themselves from being taken by the things in the trees, right? And so out of all of the cryptids, why choose Bigfoot? Because obviously, I mean, he's one of the more popular ones. But
Yeah, I mean, I have been fascinated by, like, for me, when I was a kid, it was unsolved mysteries, and that just like gave me my love of UFOs and Bigfoot. Like I was in, I don't even think there are a ton of like Bigfoot episodes of
yeah.
Unsolved Mysteries, maybe like one or two. But I was fascinated when I was a kid. And there were sometimes tales of like the creature being shy and a little bit observant, but then there were other sometimes stories about, how ferocious.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean to give him a gender. Bigfoot. There were tales of like Bigfoot being ferocious. And I just when I started writing, like I knew I wanted to write a monster story. I'm very into creature features, and so like Bigfoot was a good choice. And then as I started to write and include more elements like the racism that is apparent in the book, I just thought that Bigfoot suddenly became like a good physical manifestation of that because it's like when you talk about racism, there are people who don't necessarily believe that it exists, and no matter how much proof or evidence you put in front of them, they'll redirect the conversation or they just won't believe it. And so Bigfoot ended up being like a really good representation of that because even in our own culture, like there are people who don't believe. I don't know if I believe. I'm just saying like, everybody can't be lying at this point. All these stories and whatnot that
Mm-hmm.
we
There's
that
something
we
in
hear
those
about.
woods, guys.
There's something in the woods. So, like I think Bigfoot was a good representation for that because sometimes people don't understand that racism is not always like loud and aggressive and in your face. Like sometimes it's just I don't mean to like trivialize it either, but sometimes it's microaggressions and those can be really small. And they're sinister. Like they lurk in the background, kind of like the creature does in this story. So it just worked from that perspective, and on top of just my general love of Bigfoot.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that because we just finished reading Legend Born by Tracy Dion, and there's a big connection that you just drew where there's a line in Legend Born where she talks about how her father had explained to her that the like underlying little bits of racism that they dealt with their entire life and will always deal with their entire life was like death by a thousand cuts.
Mm.
And I just think it's so telling, right? That no matter what story, what genre, and everything, there's going to be those underlying things. And almost the like microaggressions and the racism that Jenna dealt with were scarier to me at points than Bigfoot because I was like, yeah, Bigfoot's like a tangible thing that she has to deal with, right? But there's a way to deal with Bigfoot. There's a way to kind of solve the
Mhm.
problem. You can, make sticks with your friends and try to fight them off that way. But with the racism part, like that became such a big point, which not to generalize a name, but the fact that like the one scoutmaster, I think her name is Heather, right? Such a good name for such a vile person because it's such a like typecasted name in media and literature and everything. Is there's a lot of Heathers that are just terrible people, right? And so I really liked that. Sorry, that's a
Oh,
weird.
no, I'm glad that you picked up on that because if I'm being honest, the Heather was borrowed from the Blair Witch Project
Yeah.
because it's one of my favorite movies of all time. And the Heather
Yes.
in that movie, we love Blair Witch Project. We love the
Hmm.
cast, we love the characters, but
Mhm.
like You're gonna tell me that you were on Heather's side while you were watching that movie because none of us were.
No, not at all.
She
No,
just
None.
down the camera. So that's kind of where that name came from. I was like, oh, this will be my little nod to Blair Witch Project.
Yeah, I immediately clocked that she was
Yeah.
not going to be great. I audibly gasped when she was like, "It's because you both look so alike," and I was like, "No." Especially, I think from my day job being a teacher, right? Like that's something that I've heard other teachers say because of underlying racism, right? And so there's those moments of like, no, these two people look very different. And so that was obviously one of those things that was just constantly there. Kayla, do you want to take over some of the questions?
Yeah. I have to say, the Puerto Rican representation in this book healed middle grade me so much because I didn't have something like that growing up. So what was was there any inspiration or backstory on why that particular culture?
Well, I'm half Puerto Rican. My
Oh,
mom's Puerto Rican.
yeah.
My mom's Puerto Rican, my dad's black. So it was just a way for me to include that other part of myself.
Mhm.
Because I am mixed race, I sometimes identity is something that I've always struggled with, and so I
Mhm.
always see myself in like two boxes with two
Mhm.
different communities, and it's like, my black family that I grew up with and grew around, my Puerto Rican family that I didn't get to see as often, because they lived in like different states and whatnot, and just always trying to like fuse those two parts of myself together. I'm 37 and I still struggle with identity and I still struggle with trying to like fuse those two parts of myself. And so, as you said, Kayla, that there wasn't a ton of Puerto Rican representation, especially for kids when I was a kid.
But
And like
yeah.
I sometimes saw black characters. Like I talk about the Dark 30 a lot because
Mhm.
it's one of my favorite like books from childhood, and for that reason because it had like black young characters and like horror settings, and it was for kids. But I didn't see that as much for Puerto Rican kids or the Puerto Rican side of myself. So it was just a way to like bring that part of myself out a little bit. And sometimes people don't know it. People don't, they look at you and when you're mixed race, they don't know, what you're made up of. And so
Right.
this is like a
Right.
way to say, hey, these are the two parts of me.
I love that. I love that so much. Um, the only other question I can think of off the top of my head, Steph, because I was not organized and prepared like you and pulled the questions up ahead of time. Mothman when? Because I have people in my life who are a big fan, and I need to know
She is
when I can
people.
tell them.
She is people.
It's me.
She's
I'm
people.
people. Yeah.
She's holding it for
Well,
a friend, guys.
I, Kayla, I was watching the Mothman movie. I think it's from the 90s with Richard
Yeah.
Gere. Have you seen that?
Uh-huh.
I was watching that yesterday. My husband like did not know about the questions that you were going to ask me, and he put that on yesterday. So I feel like it's a sign, maybe. I
Maybe.
also didn't appreciate that movie when I was a kid because when I was a kid, I thought it was very boring. But as an adult, I'm
Mhm.
like, oh, this is
Yeah.
horrifying, and like look at all the interconnected like webs. Um, I would love to write a Mothman book someday. I don't know if I can get away with two cryptid books. A Bigfoot book was not necessarily an easy sell.
Mm.
But my agent is like a superhero. My editor, she love her. She was just into it, from day one. So I feel like cryptid books can sometimes be a little bit harder of a sell. But if
Mhm.
everybody keeps like shouting about how they like want cryptid books, if everybody goes out and like
That.
buys more copies of It Came from the Trees, then I will have more ammo to be like, hey, I would like to do a Mothman book. And there are a couple Mothman books out there. It's not children's, but if you're looking for a good Mothman one, I would recommend Below by Laurel Hightower if you haven't read it.
Write that
It's
down.
it's
Write
a
that down.
it's a
Yeah.
little
No.
novella.
Ooh, we love novellas.
So going
It's
into
very
that
good.
idea of middle grade, right? I'm always interested in the writing process of it all because I'm always wanting to write a book, and I've now spoken to multiple authors and being like, I have such respect for you because I have that procrastination issue and the like pre-imposter syndrome. Like even before writing anything, I'm like, it's not going to be good enough for this. And so it's fine. Digressing. But do you believe that there is like a recipe for middle grade that, you know, when authors are writing, they kind of have to like check those boxes for it to fit that genre?
Um, it's tough to say. I don't think there's a recipe per se for middle grade. I do think that the only rules that you need to like bear and keep in mind when you're writing is tone of voice, because you want to make sure that you are speaking to kids without speaking down to them. And then you need to have kid characters. I can't think of anything else that like needs to be in a middle grade novel, and that's because like middle grade is a big spectrum. Like ages 8 to 12, like what a 12-year-old wants in a book is vastly different from what an 8 or a 9-year-old wants in a book. And so it's hard to say like, well, you must have these things. So I will just stick with saying like you need to make sure that you are talking to kids and not like speaking down to them, not being too didactic, and you need to make sure that your book has like middle grade characters. And remember, kids tend to read up a little bit. I specifically am trying to write for ages 10 plus in middle grade. Like whenever I approach a book, I'm approaching it from that age range, because I want to catch those. I want to try to catch those kids, before they like bounce off like straight to Stephen King. That's not as much of an issue now because there's so much more literature for kids, especially by POC readers. So there's a lot more for them to choose from. But that's my like soft spot for writing and for literature. So, but yeah, I would just say keep those two things in mind. And I will also say, Steph, don't tell yourself that it's not going to be good. My editor would probably kill me for saying this, but I hate everything that I write, like everything.
I'll
And
kill you for saying
I,
this.
I let I let my agent and my editor tell me if it's good or not. Because if I leave it to myself, I'll never submit it because I will never think that it's good. Even now, like I haven't like done like a deep dive read of trees because I know that there's always going to be something that I'll come across where I'm like, oh, this could have been better. I don't necessarily love the sound of my own voice. So don't let somebody else tell you no. Do not tell yourself no. So
I like that. That's good
guess that
advice.
helps you write.
I'll
And I
do
still have imposter syndrome too. So.
Yeah, I'll do my best on that. um so we talked about microaggressions, but going back into that for a second. So we have a couple instances of it, right? So we've got they look alike, Heather as a character. We find out I've never wanted, that's not true. I read a lot of really irritating characters, but it's
Yeah.
been at least a week since I wanted to punch a character so bad because of the moment where I believe the sheriff is talking to Jenna and her mom. And I like that her mom very quickly, despite not really believing what Jenna got going on in terms of like what she saw, she is very quick to say, like, okay, we're done talking here. The moment that the sheriff is like, oh, Heather said that you got violent or you started getting, super loud. I was like, man, Heather can catch these hands if it's necessary. And once again, that heavily comes from one, I think just being a decent human being, and two, being in a position in my day-to-day life where I'm like taking care of kids. My students would hate if I called them that because they're seniors in high school, but they're kids, And so seeing an adult just very quickly go like, yeah, to the trust was so sad. But what was the driving force in making sure that you continued adding in these microaggressions and making it to where there was multiple layers to the scariness that Jenna was dealing with?
Yeah. I think that Black and brown kids experience this kind of behavior a lot from white peers, white adults. And, you just talked about it, like some of your peers saying, like, oh, these kids look alike. You hear that in schools, and it's just not true. And I think that, when kids experience this, they don't necessarily know what it is. They don't always know how to label it. They just know that they feel unsafe. And that kind of stuff can like deeply affect a kid's development, their perception of self. Like there's just so much that goes into it. And I think it's also just really scary to be a kid in a situation where you feel like the adults who are supposed to be protecting you maybe like do not have your best interest at heart. That's really scary because who do you go to? Because that is the adult. So I think that it was important for me to include this in the book and show kids, that Reese, she puts a finger on it immediately. She shouts about it immediately. She draws attention to it. It was important that, she not experience it alone because of what I talked about before and how, some people, even when you put the proof in front of them, they will still deny, like Jenna needed to be there to witness it too, so that they could like, have their conversation without words. And then it was also important to me, though, that, Jenna rebuilt that trust in adults, which she does through troop leader Stacy, and even her mom later, when her mom starts to believe her. So I just think like it can be such an insidious thing. And when you're young, you don't always have the language to explain how somebody is making you feel. And so for any kids, especially Black and brown kids who are reading this and, thinking like, my teacher or this other adult did something that upset me, that made me feel like I am less than a person, like whatever feelings they might be harboring around this area. Like I wanted to try to like highlight it and say like, no, you're not alone. There are other kids who look like you who have experienced similar things. Maybe you should tell an adult, here's how they dealt, or maybe you should call it out, here's how this character deals with it.
Yeah, I think that's super important. And one of the things that we haven't really talked about is the fact that Jenna learns how to kind of be independent from the adults in her life when she realizes that she can't exactly trust them yet, especially with her mom, where she wanted to. She was like, I told my mom I want her to be there for me. But the moment that she figures out, like, oh, my mom is not believing me, my mom thinks it was something else, whatever. And she really leans on her grandpa, right? Because he becomes that one adult before Stacy that believes her, right? And the scene where he comes in with like the newspaper clipping is so important because he basically says it without words. And he's like, I believe that something else happened. Here's my reference sheet. He's like, here's what I know. And he both is there for her, meets her at her level, but is also kind of like warning her off of it. And so I like that once she goes back into the forest, right? When she joins a second scout troop, she's like, okay, the adults in my life have let me down. I need to do something about it. And I like that we kind of go through that journey with her and still end up in a place where she finds a new safe adult that is there for her and is willing to help and everything. And I think that's incredibly important for kids to know that they might have to navigate by themselves for a little bit, but that theoretically there should always be some sort of safe adult, in the waters with them. And I think that that's really important. We talked about how selling cryptid books is really difficult, which I think is whack. And I'll write a strongly worded email if I need to. But are there going to be any other books connected to this one? Because obviously this one ends where we find out Reese is alive and everything. And, she makes it out and stuff, which is super fun and great. I was really worried there for a second.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know if middle grade
I was
allows
like,
for,
man, we are too close to the end with no mention of Reese.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah, I was like, I don't know if middle grade is a safe space for like happy endings when it comes to children. But will there be other books kind of connected to this universe, which I guess kind of tallies on to the idea of the cryptids and everything?
Yeah, I have joked around with friends about doing the next book in the series, but maybe doing it as like a YA because those characters are growing up and like the books can grow with readers. That I think is too wild and outlandish of a step for publishing. But I think Jenna's story is done, but like I would consider more, but I don't know what that more is.
Mhm.
My sister actually had a really fantastic idea. She was like, "Oh, you could write more, from the perspective of the people who run the It Came from the Trees blog." And I was like, "That is an idea.
Yeah,
That's a
love them.
really good idea that I hadn't even thought about." So if I do end up writing something, you can thank my sister for it. But I currently no plans.
Yeah, I think they're cool because they're characters that have no idea the impact that they're having on this
Having.
girl,
Yep.
And so to find that they're a really big like driving force and her being like, there's something out there. And that was super cool. And they reminded me of like what Scooby Doo would have been if when they started they had technology kind of thing to
Yeah.
have like blogs and stuff. Like I can imagine this crew being like, hey, we're gonna just start writing this blog. And then that's how it becomes,
Velma,
Mr. Ink and stuff.
100%.
Yeah. Love her.
You know, you know what I think of? Um, I have you either of you ever seen the show So Weird? It used to come on Disney Channel.
Yes!
Okay, I didn't know
Yes!
if I was dating myself or not.
No, you and
So
Kayla, you
Weird.
and Kayla are on the same page up there.
We're right here. Right here.
So Weird used to come on Disney Channel, and there it
Mhm.
was Fee Phillips, and her mom was a rock star singer, and she lived on a tour bus, and they toured the
Yes.
country, as her mom was singing. And Fee's thing was that she was really into the supernatural because it just came to her like ghosts, whatever it was. But she would blog about it and she had her own website. And
Yeah.
I was so hooked on this show when I wanted to be Fee Phillips. Like that's how much
Yes.
like meant to me. And so like that's when I think about like the people, who run the It Came from the Trees blog. Like I hadn't put a ton of thought behind them, but I am now ever since my sister said that. And so it's like great
Nice.
to hear you say
Nice.
that.
Like an adult Fee Phillips just helping
Yeah.
out other kids. I'm
Yeah.
here for it. Let's
No, that's
go.
that's really good. So going on to the technical side of things, right? What is your we mentioned procrastination and stuff, but what does your writing process kind of look like from idea conception to it's in the hands of the readers? What's that look like?
Yeah, you know, I I will let an idea roll around in my head, and just to see like if anything comes of it. If I find that I keep thinking about it and I can't stop and I start getting excited about it, then I'll jot it down and I'll like make notes about it. Those are all story ideas on that bulletin board back there.
Nice.
Um, but I'll jot it down and I'll, either come back to it later, but if I'm getting excited, I'll try to like use that momentum to come up with a synopsis. For me, because I am such a procrastinator and it's so hard for me to get started and keep going, like I have to have a synopsis that shows like every single thing that happens, in the book. Some of those things might be tweaked or they might change a little bit later, but like I have to have like a blueprint from chapter to chapter, or else it is really easy for me to lose momentum and like walk away from my computer. So like that synopsis is like crucial to me being able to finish a complete book. Um, After I have my synopsis together, I'll sometimes share that with beta readers, usually a couple, and then maybe my agent and editor, just to see what kind of plot holes they might point out. And then once those like plot holes are filled or fixed, I can go on to the actual writing part. And so I will just like, I try to put myself on like a very strict schedule and like write it in like a few weeks if possible, because like I need to like just get it all. And we're talking very ugly draft. I need to just get everything like down on the page, because if I don't get it down on the page, then, and if I start like, playing with the language and trying to like make it pretty, or, whatever the situation might be, like that will actually keep me from finishing the book. So I just need to get everything down. So it really is just like bare bones, like this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And then I go in and try to like fill in those gaps as I like go for like a second round of revisions. I will share that with a couple beta readers, two or three usually. I try not to do too many beta readers, because too many cooks in the kitchen. Before we
Yeah.
started, I told you guys I'm the most
Mhm.
indecisive person in the world, and I really am. And one of the tricky things that I think, or a mistake that I guess a lot of like early writers make, is that letting too many people in to like give them feedback on a story, because the thing is every reader is going to want that story to be something different to suit their own reading tastes, unless they're an editor and they can see, you know, the wider appeal and potential of a book. But everybody's going to come to a story looking for something different, and if you try to appeal or cater to like all of those different interests, like you're going to lose your story, you're going to lose yourself in it. So I try to keep it like minimum 2 or 3 beta readers. And then, you know, once I feel like we're in a good place, it goes to my agent, my editor. Sometimes it depends on like if my editor is like looking to buy a new book or not. If not, it goes to my agent and then it has to go on submission. So yeah, that's kind of like, you know, what my process is like. It worked for my first book. It worked for my second book and my third book. So it works for me at this point. Like it's, you know, tested. It might not work for everybody else, but that's just, you know, how I'm able to get through a whole book without like getting distracted.
Nice.
Yeah, it's super cool. We've spoken to a couple authors, just you included, this weekend, and it's so interesting to find both of you are very like procrastination, or you both have said the same things of, when I have to write a book, I need to sit down and just dedicate immense amount of time all in one go. And so my brain immediately is like, man, is there a connection between like writing and like ADHD and all of these things? Because it's become so prevalent, I guess, and how a lot of authors are putting things together now.
We can't
Um,
be calling out our guests like that,
I don't think
Steph.
it's calling out. There's not a stigma around mental health in this house. Thank you.
I it you know what, it's there could be something there. I For the longest time I always felt like something was wrong with me because I couldn't get a book written. Like I just couldn't do it. Um, Especially as I got older and became an adult, and then it was like, oh, you have all these life tasks, all these boring adult things that you need to do that prevent you going to the grocery store, cooking dinner, doing laundry, cleaning, you know, driving here, driving there, going to work. It's all a lot, and it's a big distraction. And so like I use those as, for me personally, they were excuses. Like you know, I was too tired, and that was part of it. Like I really was too tired. I won't say it was an excuse, but like, you know, at the end of the day, I was too tired. I was too drained and robbed of creativity, you know, that I
Mhm.
used throughout the day to like sit and like dedicate that energy to like my own work. So once all that was gone, like I was able to focus more on it. But like it was more than that, right? Like I had to learn how to do it. Like I also had to learn that like, okay, if you get up from this computer and like walk away to make breakfast, you might not come back for the rest of the day. And so like learning that about myself really just like helped me, I think, be more productive because I know things about my brain and how it works. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah, I love learning about how people's brains work, but that's
Yeah,
a whole different. Sorry.
that's it. That's like we can do another episode about that later.
Yeah, I it's fine. So if you had an author come up to you and say that they were interested in writing middle grade and that they didn't know what they were doing or anything like that, what are some tips that you would give them in order to kind of welcome them into this genre that maybe you wish you would have been told?
Um, I think one of them would be to be sure that you read a lot of middle grade. I already do read a lot of middle grade. I, you know, worked in children's publishing, so like children's books have been my whole life. But you need to read a lot of middle grade. If you do not read a lot of middle grade, you're just going to write in a book that is for adults with kid characters. Like it's not going to have the right tone of voice. It won't be speaking to kids without speaking down to them. So you have to like read a lot of your book's peers. And then the second part, I would say like finding peers in the middle grade space is super important. You know, the publishing landscape is different for middle grade than it is for YA, than it is for adult books. And so I think it helps to have people in that community that you can talk to, you can compare notes with, you can bounce ideas off of them, you can reach out to them when you need support. it's just different, and like there really is a community. Like I this year joined the spooky middle grade, so if anybody's looking for more middle grade, you can go to spookymiddlegrade.com, where there are there's a collective of middle grade authors who just write horror for kids, and that community has been so invaluable to me because of like things that I've learned. I've worked in publishing for like 14 years, and there are still things that like I didn't know. Like it's different. Like publishing is different from the author angle than it is from the corporate angle when you're working in it. And so there are still things that I didn't know that I had to learn that I was able to learn through, my spooky middle grade peers. So I would just say like community, and then making sure that you're reading. And then if you read their books, they will read yours too. And you will have, natural, regular cheerleaders who are like uplifting your book. And it's just really important.
That's so cool. I've got
Love
no
that.
notes on that one. That's just cool.
Yeah.
But I mean, apart from all of that, I think I went through the questions that I had written down because it was really good. It's easy when you have a list. But you were just mentioning how you were in publishing for so long. Kind of what do you think, to dig into that for a second, what do you think was the biggest learning curve in going from the corporate side to the author side?
The biggest learning curve.
If there was one.
If there was one.
I guess just knowing how much I don't know,
Mm,
if that's like an answer.
That
Like
makes
there are just certain things that like, you think differently when you're trying to like promote or market somebody, and that's the work that I did, marketing. When you're trying to like promote and market somebody else's book, you think about that book differently, and what you would do for it. But then like being on the opposite side of things, where I'm seeing like authors and they like have all these really great ideas, but then there's also stuff that when you're on the author side of things, there's stuff that you don't know about, the back end of publishing and like how it works. So I think that there was just a lot that you think you're experienced, but then I think there was just so much that I just didn't know. And I wouldn't call it a learning curve, but it was just something that I learned in general. Like,
yeah. Being comfortable with
don't know as much as,
not knowing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Kayla, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Off topic, have you been listening to Bad Bunny's new album as much as the rest of the Puerto Rican community has been?
I have not, unfortunately, but I'll make my husband. Music is hard for me because I listen to like the same things over and over and over again. Because I just like
Same.
I don't know, seriously, like I will sit and like if I hear a song that I like, I will sit and listen to it on repeat hundreds of
Mhm.
times. And I would be very embarrassed if Spotify like ever released that information to the public.
You've
So
played
music
this
is like
song 10,201 times.
like the special notes that I get where it's like, oh, this composer or this artist has like a special message for you
Yeah.
because you were in the top
Mhm.
0.5% of lit. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So like
Mhm.
music is very hard for me unless my husband, he's big into music, and so he'll put me on like different artists and whatnot. So unless he introduces me to them, I fear that music just passes me by because I
Same.
go to like things that I already know.
Yeah, I
But
stick
I
to
will. I will.
the artists that I know and love, and then everybody else just sort of falls away.
Yeah, I did
But
get.
yes, for what it's worth, the new Bad Bunny album hits a
Okay.
specific spot in the Puerto Rican soul
All
that
right.
is
I will look
inexplicable.
into it. I promise.
I think you'll because you were talking earlier about, finding a way to sort of like join those two, or at least tap more into your Puerto Rican side, and
Mhm.
that's just been like a big thing. So I just wanted to know if that was something you'd explored yet or not.
No, I appreciate that, and I know who Bad Bunny is, but I haven't listened to a ton of music.
Okay.
Yeah, it's okay. I do think that that's a experience that a lot of mixed races, mixed ethnicities deal with, is that idea of fitting in the boxes. Speaking from my own experience and stuff, having a predominantly Mexican family and then having like my very white father, right, is always very difficult because I'll walk into any sort of situation, right, and I look to my fellow Mexicans, right? I'll look too white to be Mexican, but then to my fellow whites, which is a terrible sentence and hope to never say it again, I look too not white. And so it's kind of going back and forth into that kind of box and trying to figure out like how to really navigate it. So I think that's something that everybody can kind of connect to, figuring out, how they fit in, having communities that might not, your Spanish isn't good enough for the Hispanic community, but it's too good for the white community, or, anything like
Not to
that.
mention the racism within the Latino community as a whole.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
could go on a rant about that, but I
We're
won't
not,
because that's not
it's,
the
it's,
point
we don't
of
got, we
this.
don't got the bandwidth for it. But if nobody else has any, do you have anything else you would like to say? Any questions?
Anything else you want to promo?
Oh, yes.
Um,
Wait, Kayla, for your ears. Sorry. I'm my bad. The spider book. Let's talk about that.
um, what would you like to know? I did have a sensitivity reader. As I was writing that book, a spider crawled across the poster that was hanging above my desk and hung out there for like a good hour while I was writing. So I feel like he was
Yeah.
coming to like check on things and was
Yeah.
like,
You're not
what's the
slandering
representation
me,
like in
right?
these
Yeah.
stories? Yes, exactly. And so
You're not making a Jaws out of me, right?
exactly.
That movie really decimated the
The,
shark population.
the Spiders book, the Spiders book was tough to write. It was tougher than I expected. I have come to appreciate insects and arachnids and things, more in my adult life. Spiders, I have no issue with them. If you're up high, stay up there. Do your thing. Get rid of bugs. Don't come near me, but stay up there. So I'm fine with spiders. So it was a very tough
I
line
told
to
you to
like
cover your
tread.
ears.
Excuse,
It was
I'm
a
gonna
very
power through.
it was a very tight line to walk. Having characters who were having like spiders be the villains, but also like making readers be sympathetic to them. And so if it helps to know, Steph, the main character in the book, she really does love spiders. So there is a strong spider advocate in the book.
Nice. Nice.
But if you have arachnophobia, this might not be the book for you.
Kayla's rocking back and forth, guys.
How about this? I have another book coming out in September 2025, and that one is called Mystery James Digs Her Own Grave.
I saw
And
that.
it
Here
is
for
about
it.
a girl who was abandoned in a cemetery. She was raised in a funeral home, and she thinks she can smell ghosts. And there may or may not be a vampire haunting
Nice.
or
Yeah, you had
stalking.
Kayla with that one. The
Yeah.
spider one, I'll take over that one.
I immediately shut that down. I was like, I'm not. It's not.
I completely understand it. And then also I got the chance to write a Wednesday Addams book, which was like kind of a dream come true for me.
Right.
Because I've been like a big, like I am Wednesday. Wednesday is me. I've been a big fan of Wednesday Addams, like the character since I was a kid. So that was like a dream come. And then to get to write it, like, with the show that like features Jenna Ortega, like that was like,
Love
Yes.
that
her.
was huge.
Love
Yeah.
her. Love her
That's
kooky
so
little
exciting.
self. No, I mean I'm looking for thankfully I don't have I was gonna say I don't have any phobias, but like that would be a lie.
Liar.
Yeah, I'm not good. I don't remember the name. I
And
never
there's
remember the names for things, right? But I don't do well with like the clusters. Yeah, don't remember what that one's called. And then for anybody who has ever been or lived in like South Florida, right? This next fear is going to be really telling about how uncomfortable and awkward my life can be sometimes. I have a very big fear of the deep ocean.
Oh,
Yeah.
we are on
Yeah.
track to get it right.
Yeah, we're
We
there.
know. Ours with TH.
But it really becomes, it's such an interesting phenomenon because I grew up, going into the ocean with my father. Like we had a boat, we would always go out and I would live my very best life, right? Like I would go swim, snorkel, all of the things. And then I'm not sure when it shifted because there was never like a traumatic instance or like a movie or something that really shifted anything. But now when I think of like going into the deep ocean and not being able to see the floor, I am so uncomfortable and I'm like I don't know how I did that for so long without fear of anything, but now I fear everything in the ocean. Um I think it just comes
I
with
think
knowledge, knowledge
yes,
breeds phobias.
I was gonna say, I saw Jaws as a kid, and it wasn't Jaws for me. Like, I'm scared of sharks, but that's for an entirely different reason, and that's because my dad told me that, like, sharks eat one leg and save the other leg for later. When I was a kid, that
Oh,
was how
nice.
he introduced me to sharks.
Sorry, the shark
But,
has a
no,
lunchbox.
it does come with knowledge, and I remember for me, it was 2 things. It was, that spawned this, like, fear of the ocean. It was oh, shoot, what is the shark movie with Mandy Moore in it? 28 meters down or
Oh,
something like
yep.
that.
Oh, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
But it was like when they hit there's a point where, like, they have to, like, cross this, like I don't
Yep.
wanna spoil it
Yep,
for
yep, yep,
anybody.
yep,
They
yep,
have to
yep.
cross this, like,
No, spoil it.
crevice,
It's fine. It's been
and
out for
it's
a
like
while.
yeah, this is true. It was so deep and dark, and it was like
Mm.
it's almost like space, like, or if you're in the dark, like, you get turned around and you don't
Yeah,
know what direction is
absolutely
head up,
not.
like, that was scary,
Mhm.
and then I saw an infographic, some company did it, I can't remember who, but, like, as you scroll down, the scroll bar never really went away, and it'd be like, "Oh, this is the part of the ocean where sunlight,
Yeah. Yep.
can be
I've
seen,
seen
and then
that.
this is where the sunlight starts to get filtered out, and this is when it just kept going deeper, and as
Yep.
you're scrolling you're going down more into the ocean and you're seeing like creatures and they're like comparing like the size of humans to like the size of like a giant squid and it was just
Yeah,
I
did you
was
know
like
that there's such thing as a colossal squid? That was nightmare fuel I learned yesterday. They were like, "Oh,
I was
the giant squid is actually smaller than the colossal squid." And I'm like, "Guys, those are basic adjectives. I could have told you
I
the giant squid was smaller than the colossal squid. We didn't need to be told that."
I am so sorry that you know this now and that I know it too.
Yeah, I needed somebody to be there with me.
I know.
Um,
Yeah.
okay.
And real quick, RIP TikTok because they had
Yes.
that like also I don't know. I'm the kind of person like when I'm scared of stuff, I want to like investigate it more, and
Yeah,
that's
you wanna,
why I
like, do,
Yes.
like,
even though I'm pretty
sensory overload to, like, get yourself off of the fear, and all it does is make it worse, but you're like, "No, one day
yes,
I'll look at this." I can't
yes,
hear that one, audio that was played over every single, like, North Sea
yes,
video, right? I can't
Mhm.
hear that audio without getting, like, chills because 'cause I'm like, "Oh, something ocean themed is coming."
exactly it. The only fear I'm not like that with is, heights. No, thank you. I don't wanna know
No.
anything more about like, I wanna stay on the ground, so
Mm, mm.
Amen.
but yeah,
Amen.
I'm with you on the fear of the ocean stuff.
Ugh,
Stay on the ground, stay out of the ocean. That's all we need.
we're running out of places, you know?
That's okay. I'm okay with that. I pay enough in rent that I can keep myself comfortable at home.
That's fair. Okay, so if there is not anything else to add, questions, comments, concerns, gripes, we'll keep it open. But if not, thank you guys for listening and hanging out with us today. If you have not already, consider following us on Instagram at Margin Mavens. And as always, remember you are loved and we appreciate you.